From the world of business, we move on now to our international press review with Solange Mougin, who's seated here to my left. And you've chosen some articles about this escalating trade dispute between China and the United States.
Yeah, let's start with how the Chinese press is covering the issue. Beijing says they aren't afraid of a trade war, and the Global Times, which is a state-run paper, essentially says the same thing. In an op-ed, they quoted Chinese proverb, actually, that says, quote, self-conceited troops are destined to lose. And they say the U.S. is playing with fire. Now, the Chinese Daily, also the English-language Chinese paper, writes that Donald Trump is isolating himself, and as you can see in the cartoon, he's sort of being surrounded by I-beams. The English language site says that even U.S. corporations and many American politicians think a trade war is a bad idea, which is a sentiment which can be found in the U.S. media as well. An opinion piece in Forbes says, "We really don't want a trade war with China, Mr. Trump." Now, the article explains that trade wars can be extremely damaging, and that a tit-for-tat and trade protectionism is what helped bring about the Great Depression in the U.S. in the 1930s, and that such trade wars often actually lead to physical military wars.
Now, Solange, the New York Times has taken rather a different take on this whole story.
Yeah, the New York Times called the idea half-baked. And while they said that, they said also that it could have been a good idea. The Times argues that many countries complain about China's habit of stealing technology and of stealing know-how from foreign businesses, and that if Trump had gotten other countries such as Canada and Japan and even the EU to put pressure on China, the idea of forcing them to play by the same rules, which is essentially what Trump says he wants, well, that may have worked if he'd worked together. But as is, the Times says that the president completely lacks a viable strategy.
Well, staying with the White House, much of the American press is talking this Friday about Trump's decision to change national security advisors.
Yeah, they say add another zealot to the White House. That's how the Washington Post calls the firing of H.R. McMaster and the hiring of John Bolton. The paper says Bolton, the former U.S. ambassador to the UN, is, quote, a wild man who lacks management skills and makes up for it with his ideological extremism. It says that his hiring could bring the U.S. treacherously close to war in both North Korea and Iran, if Bolton's previous stances on both countries is any indication. Now, Slate pretty much says the same thing, that it's, quote, time to panic now. The online magazine says that Trump is coming into his own, and that with people like Bolton around him, it is time for us to, quote, duck and cover.
But Solange, some conservative media in the US is, though, praising the choice of John Bolton.
Yeah, the far-right online magazine Front Page Mag, which is known for its Islamophobic rhetoric, says, quote, this is fantastic news. It argues that getting rid of the Tillerson-McMaster appeasement crowd and having the U.S. come to grips with its enemies or threaten them with its military might is a great thing. Now, for the little anecdote that's making headlines in regard to Bolton, many news sources are actually talking, from the New York Times to Jezebel, they're actually talking about his walrus mustache. Now, this is a story that broke right after the election, and it's now resurfacing. Bolton was on the short list in 2016 to become Secretary of State. According to Trump aides at the time, the then president-elect passed up on him because he didn't like Bolton's mustache. Now, since then, some sources say that Bolton's performances on Fox News have helped Trump reconcile with people in his administration having a bushy facial hair.
Okay, let's quickly move on from mustaches and facial hair. And you found some other interesting articles in the press this Friday about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Yeah, researchers have found out that the mass of nearly 80,000 tons of garbage that's floating in the middle of the Pacific is actually 16 times bigger than they thought. As you can see here, it's 3 times the size of France. Now, National Geographic tells us that scientists were actually surprised to find out that most of the garbage is actually old fishing gear and not plastic bags and bottles. But National Geographic warns that plastic pollution in the oceans from consumers could triple in the next 30 years.
And Solange, finally, for this press review, you found a story that almost takes our viewers away to Cairo.
Yeah, The Guardian today has a beautiful photo essay of one of Cairo's historic districts. It profiles a few of the 1,000 workshops where Egyptians still practice century-old crafts. As you can see here, a man smoking a cigarette and weaving or stitching. There are also glassblowers, fabric dyers, and shoemakers.
Well worth a look. That looks very colourful and beautiful. Solange Moujan with the International Press Review. Thank you very much. Well, I'm back at the top of the hour with another roundup of world news here on France 24. In the next 30 minutes, we're bringing you our Focus report, which zooms in on the issue that split Westminster and the rest of the UK into Brexiteers and Remainers, with just over a year to go now before the kingdom cuts its ties with Brussels and sets sail alone. Our team of journalists have been crisscrossing the kingdom to find out what kind of deal voters there actually want. Do stay tuned.